All right, in part one, we saw the spark that woke the dragon. Well, today, we're going to watch that spark ignite an explosion that literally changed the world forever. You know, that's what we do here at Byte. We decode the past to understand the blueprint for our future. And let me tell you, what happened in China in the late 20th century, it's not just a chapter in that blueprint, it is the blueprint for the world we are all living in right now.
So that's the big question, right? How did this happen? This is an unbelievable story of calculated risk, of human scale that's almost impossible to comprehend, and a global revolution that put a device in your pocket, the clothes on your back, and completely rewired the entire global economy. Okay, let's dive in.
To really get the explosion, you've got to understand the pressure that built it up. See, post-Mao China, after the total devastation of the Cultural Revolution, was a nation on its knees. It was desperately in need of systemic change. The old way just wasn't working anymore. It was time for a radical, almost unthinkable experiment.
Now, this wasn't going to be some kind of shock therapy like what happened in Russia. No, this was the absolute genius of Deng Xiaoping. The philosophy was simple, but it was so profound. Don't just jump into the deep end of the river and risk drowning. Instead, feel your way across. Take one careful, deliberate step at a time. You test something, you learn, you adapt. It was a strategy of controlled chaos.
And the very first stone they decided to touch, it was one of the most audacious economic ideas of the entire 20th century, creating these tiny, isolated laboratories for capitalism right inside a fiercely communist country. Seriously, think of them like petri dishes for economic reform. These zones, and they were deliberately placed far away from the political center in Beijing, were given this unprecedented level of autonomy. They were basically told, go break the old rules, get foreign money in here, build stuff, and let's just see what happens. It was an incredibly high-stakes gamble to see if they could harness the power of the market without letting it completely consume the state.
And this timeline just perfectly illustrates that touching the stones approach. It wasn't a sudden flood, it was a slow, deliberate opening of the gates. So first, you have the Declaration of Intent in '78. Then, the small-scale experiments with the SEZs in 1980. And for 2 whole decades, they learned, they built, they proved the model worked. And then came the final pivotal step in 2001. Joining the WTO. That's the moment the trickle became an absolute tidal wave.
But look, policies and trade deals don't build factories. People do. And what happened next was the largest human migration in the history of the world. This was the human fuel for this new economic engine, and here's where the story gets truly insane.
Now, economists have a name for this whole process. It's called the Lewis model. It's a textbook theory where a country moves its huge, underemployed farming population into new, more productive factory jobs. But China didn't just follow the model. They executed it on a scale that I promise you, Arthur Lewis himself could never have even imagined.
Just think about that for a second. Over 170 million people. That is more than half the entire population of the United States. A whole generation of workers left their ancestral villages and flooded into these new coastal cities to build, to assemble, and to create the modern world as we know it.
So how in the world did the government manage this human tsunami? Well, they did it through a powerful and, let's be honest, a deeply controversial tool of social control, the hukou system. This household registration basically made migrants second-class citizens in their own country. By tying them to their rural hometowns, it denied them and their families access to city schools, to healthcare, to social safety nets. And the brutal trade-off was that it created this gigantic, flexible, and, critically, low-cost labor force that made the world's workshop possible.
And the results of this grand experiment, the marriage of capitalist zones with this controlled river of human labor, they were just staggering. This wasn't just an economic shift, it was a revolution that reached into every single home on the planet. And by the way, if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, do me a favor and smash that like button to let the algorithm know.
Okay, now what's really amazing about this slide is the story it tells. The blue line, that's GDP, and it's just shooting for the moon. But look at the orange and gray lines. Those are the poverty rates. They're in an absolute free fall. This economic explosion lifted hundreds of millions of people out of destitution in a single generation. It's the fastest and largest poverty reduction in all of human history.
So what about those little Tetri dishes we talked about, the SEZs? Well, they didn't just work. They became the rocket engines of the entire economy. Get this, by 2007, just a handful of these zones were responsible for over a fifth of China's GDP, nearly half of its foreign investment, and an unbelievable 60% of all of China's exports. The gamble didn't just pay off, it hit a jackpot that nobody could have ever imagined.
So, what did all this mean for you?
Well, it's something called the China price effect. Suddenly, everything from TVs to t-shirts to toys got dramatically cheaper. The incredible efficiency and scale of China's manufacturing machine put this constant downward pressure on the price of goods everywhere. It fundamentally changed what we could all afford and what we expected to pay for, well, for everything.
But this miracle had a dark side. Progress on this scale, moving at this speed, it always comes at a cost. And the bill for becoming the world's workshop was about to come due, both for the rest of the world and for China itself. 3.7 million. That's the estimated number of American jobs that were displaced by the so-called China shock just between 2001 and 2018. That flood of low-cost goods that filled up our stores also hollowed out manufacturing communities all across the United States. So the crucial point here is that this was a total double-edged sword. For us as consumers, it meant incredible savings. But for millions of manufacturing workers, it meant lost jobs, downward pressure on wages, and the tearing of the social fabric that led directly to the kind of political polarization we see all around us today. And the costs inside China were just as staggering. The growth at all costs mantra unleashed catastrophic environmental damage, costing the country nearly 8% of its GDP. That same engine of progress created these deep social scars, leaving 58 million left-behind children as their parents migrated for work. And all that new money? It created rampant corruption that siphoned off a mind-boggling portion of the country's wealth.
So China became the world's factory. It lifted its people from poverty, and it completely reshaped the globe. But what if I told you that was never the point? That becoming the planet's workshop was just phase one of a much, much larger plan.
This is the single most critical takeaway from this entire story. All of it, the zones, the migration, the deals, the immense human and environmental sacrifice, it was never, ever the end goal.
It was just the foundation, a base for accumulating unimaginable amounts of capital, decades of industrial experience, and incredible global leverage.
The wealth and the power that were forged in this fire wasn't just for building a modern nation, it was a war chest intended to fuel the next great global conflict.
And that is exactly where we're going in the grand finale, Part 3. We are going to break down how China is using this massive war chest to fight for absolute dominance in the technologies that will define our future: AI, semiconductors, and green energy. This is the new battlefield. You absolutely do not want to miss the final chapter of this trilogy, so make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. And hey, if you're new here, the link to Part 1 is right below. Go get the full story. It has been an absolute blast digging into this with you. I'll see you for the finale.